them, you have to pay a fee for it. And very basic things. Or one of the most interesting one was that a lot of organizations had a web page done by a webmaster who put his name, his address as a billing information and as a contact information for the domain name, and the guy or the girl went away after they did their work, and nobody has any idea what how to do that. And then let's to the next one. What is very, very important, that a lot of NGOs answered that, yeah, but we moved over to Facebook or something like that. And it's really interesting that 65% of the NGOs investigated have moved to their web presence to the social media sites such as Facebook. So instead of using domain-based web pages, they just moved their whole operation over to Facebook or to a social media site just because it was much easier. The conclusion of all of this is that many large organizations, mainly in developing countries, undoubtedly make effective use of the opportunities the internet uses them, but the vast majority of the NGOs have huge and very, very basic problems just to do that. We are talking not about very complicated problems, we are talking about very basic problems, and that's very important. So the next question, of course, is so what do we have to be done to make NGOs allow NGOs to make the best possible use, to really use this wonderful tool, because information and communication technologies, and there is simply the next answer, the logical answer to that is awareness and capacity building. Awareness and capacity building often has a huge problem. We have a lot of programs, and a lot of programs which relates to domain names and things like that, which basically say, okay, this is how it works. You have to do that, and here we go. And a lot of organizations don't do that, quite simply because they don't understand that it's relevant for them. For them, quite simply, we have to explain why it is important for an NGO first. We have to tell an NGO what benefits they have, where the win-win situation is for them, and not just expect them to enter and to do things without them understand what actually is important. And the core message to explain so what is a message which we should give to the NGOs to make it relevant is not to explain only how, for example, how names and numbers work and what a domain name is and how to engage in internet governance and all that stuff. What we have to do is to move our attitude from names and numbers also to saying that it's names, numbers, and people. And I think that is a very important message and shift, because if we only talk about the technology and what people have to do, they will get more and more stranger to this one. So the next problem is the next opportunity is quite simply what's happening. Where are the opportunities for NGOs and to make domain-based web pages and their presence a success? As we talked that the internet and the internet technology and the domain name space, the DNS, needs to connect to the NGOs. The NGOs need to connect to their end users, to the people they're actually operating for. And this basically means that one of the big opportunity is called the so-called domain, community-based domain. Instead of just simply saying, okay, here's my web page, here's my information about ourselves, that's what we are going to do, this is how you can join us, you have to say, okay, you are interested in that topic, you are interested in that, you want to achieve that and that. How can we use this web space to work together, to operate, and to create a community that achieves that goal, and that community needs to also give you something back in return for, or how to do that. And there are actually quite huge economical opportunities, because instead of just selling a message, you can also sell services, you can sell products, you can sell participation that goes from insurance up till donations. Web pages for NGOs doesn't mean just give us money, donate money, we need $50. It means much more. You can actually use these web pages and domain web spaces to actually create income and cash on a very great way. I just want to give two examples, and I can't unfortunately go into the details of this web page. But when you want to see this, what I just explained in action, please go to the website of Ecotier, which is an Indian foundation which connects about 220,000 Indian farmers, and with very basic communities, products, services. Just simply, for example, a service how to build a toilet, which is, in the context for India is a huge step, and is really a successful social business. On the other hand, Ecotier is a not-for-profit organization. The other organization I want to mention as an example is a Latin American Somos Telecentros network. You might remember that Somos Telecentros was one of the strongest networks around Latin America, and with hundreds and thousands of telecenters. And Somos Telecentros, at the moment, does something very exciting for me. They are not there yet, but they're changing from Somos Telecentros to Somos Comunidades. And you will see over 2015 that there's suddenly a movement which was basically thematic-based and connectivity-based becoming a community. And I think that's something very exciting, and exciting also in an economical sense, because there are a lot of things that actually create sustainability and income. That's why I came up with this wonderful little slide with the knot, because a lot of we are in a situation now that we can't do that now as NGOs alone. We can't say, okay, we are pure NGOs, we are not businesses, we are not cooperating with a business sector, or we are not cooperating with the governmental sector and everything. Nowadays, if you want to do that, and if one of NGOs want to use the internet in a profitable and good way, you basically have to do it in cooperation with others. And there is no longer NGO not-for-profit sector also on the internet. There is an NGO profit sector which does, for example, which does very much business opportunities or whatsoever.
Do you have the site address, Klaus, for Somos?
No, Somos at the moment is reforming and the point is quite simply, I don't want to give the site until they have the newest and latest version up. I just want to give that as an example of the movement from one concept to another concept. And just to end up with a slide with a knot as an example, those who went to the Ecotier site, you found out they are not registered as a .org. They will never register as a .ngo. They are registered as a .com. And they see themselves as an NGO, and they are really nothing else but an NGO, because the money they generate, and the money is going not into anybody's private copy, it goes straight back into the community. So I think that's a very nice and fine example. So What will the future bring? What do we have to do to make all these things happen? Straightforward. In order to make effective use for the NGOs on the internet, we have to do very basic awareness building about in civil society and in the NGO world. What does it mean? And what do I need to do? And I'm not talking about big concepts. I'm talking about going back to the thing. This is how I register a domain. This is how I maintain a domain. This is how these are the costs. These are the abilities. These are the concepts. Very, very basic thing. We need to do that basic capacity building and explain also to organizations that the domain name based, that the real website has a lot of advantages in front of just having a social media site. We need to increase the relevance of the internet and the internet governance to organizations because and to NGOs, because we are at the point where a lot of things that are completely important and affect NGOs are discussed and decided in the different internet governance forums, but the NGO world is not there. The real NGOs are not there. And why should they there if they don't know why it is important? So we really need to get the message out and increase awareness. That needs to result in an increase of domain name registration and renewal of domain name registration. I think it's much more important not to look just what the amount of domains which are registered, but which of these registered domains are actually renewed after a year or two. Who's actually maintaining the web page? And the last one, which I said in the last slide, the enable cross-sectorial cooperation and participation. We need to break up the silos we are living in, and it needs to be normal for an NGO to talk to the business sector, to talk to the intellectual property rights sector, to talk to the governmental sector in order to get their goals achieved and done. Okay, now let's talk a little bit about Pathfinder. So you will have seen, or you will see when you are going to the Pathfinder website, which is inside the GKPF website. What are we going to do over 2015 and beyond? We are launching this week or next week a very, very basic survey to the NGOs in Europe, and to find out with 8 questions which every NGO can really answer in 5 minutes, and it's not these proverbial 5 minutes every survey says you, it's really 5 minutes and not 15, where we find out what are actually the situation and needs of these organizations in Europe. And we will, with partners, bring out the same surveys for the other regions. The next one will be Africa, Latin America, Asia, and so on, to see what are the real needs. We need to find out we have to ask the NGOs and what they need, and not make it up what we think they need. We will do a lot of webinars at different events, for example, in Africa, Latin America. We are building up regional organizations. Just yesterday, we were talking about the establishment of the regional hub in Latin America. There will be a regional hub created also for North America, and the other and in the hub in Brussels, basically as a mothership, and the other sectors and regions hopefully will follow in 2015. We will go on with straightforward awareness and capacity building, and there's, for example, 2 or 3 media experts absolutely here in the room. And for example, we will trying to do little advertising spots and things like that. Just simply 30-second stop. Why is it important? What is going on? We can't make messages and say, okay, you have to do the DNSSEC, to go to the GNSO, to enter the GNS GKP to do something. No, that's not important. What is important is a basic message that gives creates awareness and capacity to maintain and do your web page. Of course, it sounds like an old concept, but we still need to do the hard work of actually creating resource centers where people actually can get the help and the resources they need. And all that basically is supposed to be a pathway into internet governance for NGOs and the mechanisms of ICANN, IGF, and so on. But we don't expect, and we can't expect, that all NGOs will engage themselves in internet governance. Those who have an interest, those who have the relevance in the internet governance will do so, but they can't do that if they don't have the initial step of participation. So that's it. That was a very frantic 15 minutes, and I thank you for that. And I'm open for questions, and back to you, Laurie.
Okay, are there any questions in the room or out there in cyberspace? I have a question. Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, Martin. Go ahead.
Yes, take your name. Yes, my name is Martin Silva from Argentina. My question is, you were talking about one of the examples of community-based web, and they use the domain .com. What's your position regarding the domain names that NGOs should use? Should they use the GTLDs that are addressed to NGOs? That should be part of the capacity building of saying, well, this is your place inside the DNS system, or it's okay that they can use .com as well? Is it relevant?
I think, thank you, it's a very great question. The answer is straightforward. I think everybody should register the domain which suits their purpose best. So, for example, in the case of Ecoutier, they do real commercial work in the non-governmental space. So why shouldn't they use .com for themselves? Others are real .orgs, and others will, for example, use a new GDLD of .ngo.ong. I think the organizations and the people who maintain that website basically have to choose which domain they want to take, and they also need to be free to choose in which group of internet governance or which stakeholder group in internet governance they want to join. Even if you have a .com like Ecoutier, they are an NGO and they belong into the NGO space. At the same time, they belong into the business space. The next one is Rudy Vansnick.
Well, Rudy for the transcript. To add to what Klaus was just mentioning is that sometimes you're not able to have your domain name. You sometimes don't have the chance to book your domain name because somebody else booked your domain name. Don't forget that it's a unique identifier, and at the end, it's a kind of brand. And if you put yourself in a .com, the outside world will see you as rather a commercial entity and not an NGO. And that's one of the reasons why we need to highlight that it is important that NGOs try to stick in the world where they really fit better than being seen as a commercial entity, which pushes them very often also, if they ask for funding, for grants, very often organizations that are giving grants are picking up the fact that, yeah, but you catalog yourself in a commercial world and not in the NGO world. So it's something that I think maybe Brian is going to pick up also in his session. It's important that we learn NGOs, what the value is, and that they understand why they are in a .org and not in a .com.
Glenn?
Glenn McKnight for the transcript. In Canada, we have 173,000 not-for-profits, which is probably 5 times the number of people working in the car industry. Huge sector. They were the first ones in the game with telecenters, They were well funded, but they fell asleep at the switch. Their telecommunities funding got cut last year, $18 million. And they've been, in many ways, not educating the public on their role and the significance of why this is a significant tool in their arsenal. I've participated in the summer schools of internet governance, 3 days. Do I know more about internet governance after the 3 days? No. I think there's certain people in the not-for-profit sector that have claimed this space. And you know, it's like some professionals, you know, it's a language they speak, they don't communicate very well, the eyes glaze over. I participated with the not-for-profit technology conference last year here in Washington, and we spoke on not-for-profit radio. We did a little, you know, lunch get-together because they were promoting the .ngo GTLDs through PIR. And it was a great opportunity. And I couldn't talk to enough people, 3,500 people. I tried my best. I got to about 3,000 people. No, just joking. But I think we need, this is a great summary, Klaus. I like what you did. I think you have a battle strategy here. I think you know what you're doing. It's desperately needed. And we need to get out to those organizations through many ways to get the message out. Say, okay, it's yours. You're losing it. You lost control.
Adrian, did you have a follow-up?
Yes.
I have a question.
Yes, I'm sorry, who's speaking?
Yes, I don't know how to interact because I am in the phone, so I am not in the room, but I would like if you can consider me in the question.
Absolutely. Please go ahead, and Adrian will go after you. Please state your name so we know who's speaking.
My name is Katten. I work in Chasquinet and also in Somos Arrobas Comunidad. Thank you, Klaus, for doing the presentation. It really helps, at least for the nonprofit organizations in Latin America, what's happening and what's going on. Personally, I have been very frustrated as a representative of a nonprofit organization because biggest challenges that we are facing is the changing of the web and the social media, and there is no link between both of them. If I am working with very poor sectors in Ecuador, they are not, they don't have the knowledge on how to make a registration of a domain name. So that's why we need to work in community-based domain. So I would appreciate if you can explain a little bit more, what do you mean about community-based domain? We are using .org, Somos Comunidad.org. Somos Comunidad is one of the organizations that are using very much Facebook because that's the only way that we could address the technical problems, and it exists a gap of what's happening with the web page, and that's a reality. That's why I want to put an example. But I would want to understand, I would like to understand more how this domain name of community-based domain works, and how we can avoid the technical problems, because if the web, which are no more longer webmasters or whatever you want, leave an organization, we are hooked with the person who has registered the domain name in GoDaddy or whatever, and we cannot resolve the problems of transferring the server and all the technical problems, which is another huge problem that many NGOs and nonprofits organizations are happening. I would appreciate how, in a simple way, you are guiding nonprofits to use the community-based domain, how in a simple way we can guide nonprofits that are facing technical problems, not using their web page because of internal issues and also of policies inside of the registrars organizations, and they lose control of their web page, and how as a non-profit we can work together.
Thank you very much, Karin. This is a very complex question, but let me try to give a straightforward answer. What I said with the domain name system, it's about names and numbers. There's a technology, and the technology has certain demands and certain needs. And what happens at the moment is the NGOs need to adapt to the technology. And when I said on the slide, names, numbers, and people, it means that the technology, for example, now needs to be adapted also in a way that NGO find it easy to register and maintain their web pages. That's one of the aspects of community-based. The other aspect of community-based is that the communities are taking charge of their domains and taking this on. Thank you for the question. It's extremely complex. It's very important. I think the revolution which has to happen is that we make the internet work for the people and not the people make work for the internet. And one of the next webinars this year will actually go specifically into the definition and in the opportunities of domain-based internet.
Thank you.
Community-based.
I agree. I think the complexity of the question demands actually another workshop. And you can also, as I said, you're calling in, but people who have follow-up questions can type them in the community chat who have that technical ability to do so. That being said, I really want to move on to our second speaker, Brian Winterfeldt. He has a lot to say about how to protect your rights on the internet and to give us an update on a very important and legislative initiative that's happening in the EU that could have a very sobering effect on a nonprofit's ability to register its name once it gets there.
Hello, everyone. First, I want to thank Klaus and Lori for inviting me to speak today. I think this initiative is very valuable, and building sort of bridges within the internet governance community is something we think is really important. Very often, intellectual property is seen as adverse to the interests of NGOs, and that's something that has sort of been created, at least within the ICANN world, sort of at the council table and the GNSO, and it's something that we really want to get away from because we think we should be working in partnership. In fact, not-for-profits and NGOs have valuable intellectual property that they need to be minding and protecting, and as we've already heard discussed today, there are important considerations for how you're going to represent your brand in the DNS.
Brian, I'd like to interrupt for 1 minute and ask you to explain GNSO to people who may not be familiar.
Sure. So the GNSO is the Generic Name Services Organization. It's the part of ICANN that's responsible for setting policy for all of the generic top-level domain names. So that includes the 22 or 23 ones that we're all familiar with before the new GTLD program, such as .com, .net, and .org, which is obviously very important for not-for-profits. We've already talked today, but also the GNSO sets policy for all of the new GTLDs, which include the hundreds and hundreds of new GTLDs that are going online right now as we speak. So it's a very important place, and at the table for the GNSO Council that actually creates the policy are different parts of the multi-stakeholder community that really represent ICANN. And so there's a place at the table. I'm one of the two counselors for the intellectual property constituency that represents brand owner and other intellectual property interests at the table. There are also other counselor seats that go to other non-contracted party interests, including not-for-profit organizational constituency has its own seats at the table. Other non-commercial interests are at the table. And then we also have at the table the contracted parties, which include the registries and the registrars that make up the DNS. And so it's a real diverse group of interests. And so we're really looking for ways for the commercial interests to work with the non-commercial interests and to see that we actually have a lot of common ground. And so that's part of why I'm here today, to hopefully continue to build that dialogue and to grow our cooperation together.
Thank you.
There we go. So just a few kind of trademark basics. What is a trademark? A trademark is really a source indicator. It's what indicates to the world the source or origin of your products or services. And so they're just as important in the nonprofit world, I think, as they are in the commercial world. A trademark can be any word, phrase, or symbol that you use for that identification. So for example, for Lori's organization, they use ASCD as their brand. And they also have a logo that also serves as a source indicator for the services that they offer and for any work that they do kind of publicly facing. And nonprofit entities and NGOs have trademarks as well. And so that's something where we definitely have common interests with the commercial space. And as Lori mentioned, my practice, we work in addition with a lot of commercial interests. We work with a lot of NGOs. And as Lori mentioned, we were just recently given an award by the International Trademark Association for our dedication to working with nonprofits. So many nonprofits and NGOs have domain names that correspond to their trademarks. A couple examples we have here on the screen. Many of you are probably familiar with these organizations. There's redcross.org, unitedway.org. Those are just several examples, and we just had a little bit of a discussion that I think is really interesting, and I'll be looking forward to maybe a future workshop that's really dedicated to sort of selecting your online brand presence. What domain names are important for your organization? One of the things I would add to what was mentioned previously is, in addition to thinking what your primary sort of home is going to be on the internet, which URL you're going to use, from a trademark standpoint, we also like to think about, are there defensively other spaces where you want to register? So for example, you may decide that .org is going to really be the right home for you. So you might want ASD.org to be the real primary home for you on the internet. But also with these new GTLDs that are coming out, if there are other ones that intersect with the nonprofit space or that have a descriptor that really relates to your business. So for example, for Lori's organization, if there's a .education, you might want to think about obtaining those and at least redirecting them to your primary presence as well. So that's just kind of an extra point to think about, and I'm sure we'll go into more detail when there's kind of a more focused workshop about creating your online brand presence. Online space is obviously really important, and I think it's growing in importance. And I think Klaus's point was really interesting about how also social media is becoming a really important part of how not-for-profits create a dialogue with their user base and their constituents, and also for purposes of fundraising. So unfortunately in the online world, in addition to thinking about how you're going to present your brand and where your home's going to be, there also are abuses of trademarks that we have to be concerned about. And again, those abuses, unfortunately, don't just haunt the commercial space, but they also impact the non-commercial area. And I think, frankly, in a lot of ways, they impact in an even more adverse way, because very often the not-for-profits and the NGOs don't have the resources and sort of the programs in place to deal with this type of damaging behavior that happens. We have on the screen here an example, AmericanRedCross.info, which was a website that was put up to solicit donations. There was an actual case for the American Red Cross where this happened. After sending 2 cease and desist letters, the site continued on. They actually went so far as to apply for a trademark for the domain name as a trademark. And that was rejected by the United States Patent and Trademark Office. And eventually a UDRP was filed, the Uniform Dispute Resolution Process was used, which is an administrative proceeding that's available to organizations to combat this kind of abuse where a domain name is registered that incorporates someone's intellectual property or trademark. And this domain name was transferred to the American Red Cross. But again, these sorts of schemes can be very damaging to the brand or reputation for an NGO, and very often, they don't have the resources to even identify these types of issues or to deal with them very efficiently. So that's one of the things that maybe in the future we can have something more in depth. When we have that workshop where we talk about how to kind of create your online presence, maybe we can also talk about how to protect your brand. And again, that's kind of a larger dialogue or conversation that we'd love to have to help give you some cost-effective tools to shepherd and take care of your brand and protect. So the other thing to keep in mind is that there's really a balance in this space, and I think this balance is sometimes where we have a tension, but it's something I think we can walk together. And Lori's mentioned earlier, we're going to talk in a minute about an example of legislation where I think we can work together, because the interesting thing about the DNS is trademark law does sort of conflate with free speech and other issues. And we want to make sure that we're kind of finding the right balance. Trademark laws are important, they need to be respected. Again, they're important to NGOs, but we don't want to go so far as to inhibit free speech. And so, for example, on the slide here, we have a good example of what we call sort of a gripe site or a discussion area that can be created. And so this is where using someone else's trademark in this context to comment on the products or services or the organization is appropriate and is fair use. And These are just a couple examples of sort of free speech sites where there is a discussion sort of taking place about an organization. That's something we definitely want to promote and make room for on the internet as well. So I wanted to put a slide in about acronyms. Very often a lot of NGOs use acronyms as their primary identifier and essentially their public-facing brand. What's difficult in the domain name system is that only one registrant can have a particular domain name. This is where actually the new GTLD program can be a benefit, I think, to NGOs who are in this issue. You know, in the past, really .org, I think, was the primary space for NGOs. But the problem is, you know, only one organization can get AARP or BRAC or ASCD in that space. And if you weren't the first one to obtain that, then you were sort of left out and you had to come up with sort of an alternative. Now having other spaces opening up may make more room for you to obtain a domain name that really better fits your organization. So I wanted to bring in kind of a case study example of where I think you can see the kind of interaction in the domain name space between trademark rights and free speech, and where I think the non-commercial interests and the commercial interests need to partner and work together to find the right balance. Right now, there is EU trademark reform that is in discussions in Europe right now. It's new regulation, Article 9, Directive Article 10, and it's about the rights conferred by a community trademark that's happening in Europe. And there's actually some language that's included that refers to domain names that could be very concerning and have sort of a chilling effect on potentially not-for-profit organizations and towards free speech. So if you look at the language that's being included, and if you look at the bottom part that's in red, essentially this is a list of things that will be prohibited based on trademark rights in the European Union if this legislation is successful, and includes using the sign as a trade or company name, or as a domain name, or as a part thereof.
I want to clarify, too, that what's prohibited is for non-trademark holders. The trademark holders have these rights, but if you're a non-trademark holder, you will be prohibited from these acts, and the domain issue that Brian's about to discuss is a particular concern to nonprofits.
That's exactly right, Lori. So essentially, the highlighted reform submission could, it essentially would give the rights holder for a trademark to prevent the inclusion of their mark within a domain name. As we just mentioned a minute ago, for free speech purposes, there may be a reason why that name could legitimately be used in a domain name. In addition, there obviously could be multiple parties that have the rights to a particular domain name, and there may be other uses for a trademark. So every trademark, is not a blanket right. Trademark rights are tied to jurisdictions, they're tied to specific products and services, and very often they're dictionary terms that are used with particular products and services in a way that creates rights, but they're not absolute rights. So for example, let's talk about Apple. So Apple, in the context of computers, certainly is one of the strongest brands in the world, and they're one of the most successful companies in the world. Their rights are very, very strong, but they don't have exclusive rights to the term Apple, period. And in theory, this legislation, if passed in the form that it's in, the trademark owner, Apple, could prevent someone from including Apple in a domain name, and potentially for any purpose, because the way the legislation is written, it's not narrowing the rights to the goods and services that it's registered for or a particular jurisdiction. So we're very concerned about this legislation because it could really have a very negative impact on the ability of people to register domain names that they legitimately should have a right to use.
I wanted to put by way of example, let's say I'm a coalition of community apple growers.
Yeah.
Right? I'm somewhere on a cooperative farm and I'm getting other cooperative farms together and we're producing apples and we're doing it in Europe. And now all of a sudden I may not be able to register communityapple.org.
Yep.
And it's a very practical application for this, and it's concerning.
And I think this is just an example of where legislation gets drafted I think we're all sort of familiar with that not being necessarily the most thoughtful or well thought out process. And I think, this is where we all need to work together to kind of monitor these types of things to make sure that the right balance is sort of being struck between trademark rights and the rights of third parties to use different things.
Sorry.
No problem. So here is another example of where multiple parties may have rights to the same string or the same acronym. So for example, looking at this slide here, we have an example of multiple parties having the right to SASA as their trademark. And again, they all have rights to use the string, but it's tied to their different organizations and what they do with them. Another particularly concerning part of the language is that not only does it say that they have the right to the mark itself, but they also say that it has a right to a part thereof. And a part thereof is particularly concerning. So that means, for example, it could just be a component of the mark. And that is where, again, we really feel like this has actually gone really too far. And so, for example, here we have, ING being used as a trademark for banking and financial services. It's obviously it's also an acronym for other organizations. For example, the International Netherlands Group has that as a trademark. But it's also, in the English language, a suffix to all gerunds. And so potentially, the way this has been drafted, somebody, ING, for example, could come in and object to someone who's registered a gerund as part of the URL and say, well, this contains a component of our mark. And so again, this language is particularly concerning for that reason. So as Lori mentioned, we think that this directive is a good example of where there is probably a well-intentioned granting of rights to trademark owners to combat the kind of infringement that we talked about earlier and that we see online, but where this language is frankly not precise enough and not tailored enough, so that it could have very negative implications on free speech and could impact NGOs in a very negative way. And so this is just a good example, I think, of where we can all work together, and in fact, we have an opportunity to really work to hopefully push to make this language more precise and to more carefully tailor the rights so that the brand owners have the protections they need and the ability to stop fraud and infringement online while not having a chilling effect on free speech or the rights of NGOs or nonprofits. So again, that's a very kind of quick overview, and I would actually love to participate maybe in the future on something that's more in-depth to help not-for-profits think about how to protect their brands and how to put together kind of cost-effective programs that make sense for them. But this was meant to be sort of a high-level overview about why NGOs should care about intellectual property interests and how we actually should be all working together to kind of shepherd the process of intellectual property rights and the balance with free speech and making sure that other organizations have the ability to do what they need to do in the DNS.
Thank you, Brian. We do plan an extended series of topical programs based on exactly some of the issues that have been raised today. Already in the works are a discussion of the community GPLD, which I think is very important to the nonprofit sector and what that might mean. There are now extensions that you can apply for any extension in the world. And there is a mechanism to build capacity within an entire sector globally by using a dot something, whether it's, I don't know, dot good work or dot cooperative or dot whatever we can think of. There is a dot NGO that has been delegated and is set to be released. We don't have a specific date for that, but there are also extensions that are coming on that are directly related to nonprofit work. That's one area. Another area, going to Brian's concerns as a counselor, is how do you choose a domain portfolio? What does that mean to a nonprofit? Is one name enough? Should one name be enough? Perhaps there's different regions you can meet with different names and have them go all one place, have them all go to language-specific pages. There are many variations of your brand presence online. And so nonprofits are challenged with a couple of things. How do we deliver our message effectively in every piece of work that we do? And someone had asked online, well, if your name is really long, isn't it better to use an acronym? It may not be. Let's say you're out to preserve trees and you're the International Forest Protection Association. Instead of being IFPT, maybe it's better to own preservetrees.org, because within the domain itself, you can convey a mission message. Do I have other comments? Anything? Our next speaker has arrived. We'll give her a minute. Yes, we'll give her a minute.
Hello, everybody.
Hi,
I couldn't be here the whole time.
We can go to one question that Adrian Hall has posted online, or rather a comment, about why would it be better to have your own domain page rather than use a Facebook page. And I think there's a lot of arguments, and maybe Brian and I could have a discussion as IP counselors, with Klaus chiming in as a capacity builder. But on one hand, you could argue that social media is the perfect venue. It's a low-cost way to design a page. It's a way of reaching literally millions, hundreds of millions of potential eyes, ears to your message. And it's just no fuss, no bother on a social media site. So why would I go to the expense of designing my own web page, having my own domain name, worrying about portfolio management, which could literally go into the hundreds of thousands of American dollars if you do it sort of to the max? So how would you respond?
I've got a very simplistic answer to that. The question if you rent a house or if you own a house. If you rent a house, you have a setup, you have to live with it, and other people tell you how to live with it and what the rules and regulations is. You can't take out a wall, you can't change the color and things like this. If you have a domain name and you own a house and that is your space, you actually can do a lot of things in there which you can't do if you rent a house. It's a very simplistic but straightforward answer. In the case of NGOs, what is very, very important is, for example, in sustainability. The social media side don't give you the range of opportunities to put in sustainability mechanisms you need and actually to keep your NGO going in a world of ICTs. So, but the simplistic answer to that is just straightforward. It's the difference between renting and owning.
There's Joan Kerr, Adrian Hall, and then I think Tom Orrell maybe have a question. So Joan?
Sure. Joan Kerr, for the record, that's exactly the point I was going to make about sustainability. I think it's about what is it that you're trying to achieve? And you have to ask yourself that. If you want your audience to interact and be social, sure, Facebook page is good because you're getting that immediate feedback and all of that. If you want to look at your long-term sustainability in terms of fundraising, getting a message out, community involvement, and really driving your message and building your audience and building your organization as well, I think that a website is something that you can seriously look at. And the cost offset it if you can build in that donation and that sustainability, build it into your long-term strategy.
Adrian?
So I was kind of being devil's advocate by asking the question anyway, but having just spent the last 2 days looking at the values of internet governance and the purposes of it. But in my opinion, I don't think it's a question of either or anyway. I think you should have a whole strategy that incorporates what we need to do through the process of pathfinding and engagement is to help these people with the NGOs who ICT is not their core competency. It's not their main thing. It's something that they will do because they have to have an online presence, and Facebook gives them a really easy way to do that. But a key thing is to show them how to develop a strategy and how to build a website, because you can get WordPress websites which is next to nothing. You don't have to spend a lot of money, and they can be easy to set up. But unless you know that and you know how to do that, then they're not going to do that, and that's one of our key roles in
basics.
It's basics
It's
to us
all
because
about
we
the
know
basics.
it, but it's not basics to the people who are out there and need to know it.
Okay, now we're going to move on to a much more laser-specific topic. We're going from very broad now to narrow.
Okay.
I had earlier in the program introduced Theresa Swinheart, who is the Senior Advisor to the President of ICANN, to be clear, on strategy. Teresa's going to speak about the IANA tradition. IANA is the Internet Assigned Numbers Authority, and it is the body that is responsible for literally the numbers, not the names. It's physically where signals are going when you type in a name. There's been a lot in the world media about how administration of IANA is about to change. Currently, it's contracted to ICANN with U.S. government oversight and then contracted to a private contractor. U.S. oversight is about to shift. Whether that's a good or bad thing, who knows? However, how it relates to nonprofit organizations is a question that I don't think has been addressed very widely in the press. There's been a lot of concern from U.S. legislators, from global internet providers, many of whom are based in the U.S. But really, what does this mean to the nonprofit sector? How important is it as an issue? Should we be following it? And Teresa's going to tell us what we need to know.
So first, thank you very much for having me here, and to the participants online. And I'm sorry I couldn't be here for the whole time of the discussion. As a result, I will take the liberty of just making a few things before I go into the laser topic I'm addressing. And I think that's one of the broader role of civil society and NGOs in the context of internet policy-related development issues. And I think a lot of times one could say, well, why is this important to civil society, and why is this an important topic? And my general sense is it's really twofold. One is retaining an open, seamless internet is important for the globe. It's important for a wide range of issues, whether it's a freedom of speech or whether it is to raise certain issues and to have certain dialogues or to hear about certain concerns of which the NGOs are reaching out to their respective communities. So I think to a point that was being discussed earlier, it is a mechanism for engaging also with the respective communities and getting certain messages out. And as a result, it does have an impact as a use of a tool for daily dialogue from that perspective. I think the other facet, though, is that the views of these respective communities can be very important for the development of internet policy. They can bring a different perspective than, for example, a business necessarily or a government, and that it provides the opportunity to raise issues that may not have been thought about in the development of internet policy more broadly. And that as one looks at internet policy in a multi-stakeholder environment, which I know many of us had lived through the World Summit process and many other areas, a long-term sustainable policy, regardless of the issue, whether it's privacy or whether it's something else, can only be long-term and sustainable and implementable if all stakeholders have come together and been a participant in raising the different issues and fleshing out what the right solution is. The internet is too diverse, it's too seamless, it's transitioning borders, it is being used by multiple entities, and so there's that facet. So in looking at the context of both the importance of the internet as a tool and mechanism, regardless of what the interest areas are, and as an opportunity for raising issues that are important, the dialogue and the participation of NGOs, of civil society, is absolutely critical. And we saw during the World Summit process, we've seen with some of the intergovernmental organization dialogues that there's oftentimes been a push to ensure that all stakeholders have a seat at the table. You know, the ICANN structure allows for that. It's been built into the structure already. It's been hardwired into the structure itself, and so that provides an important voice for issues specifically around ICANN's mission and mandate. So then when it comes to the laser question around the IANA stewardship transition, so specifically the transition of the U.S. role in the context of the IANA contract to the multi-stakeholder community, that then becomes quite important and relevant. not because of potentially the immediate operational relationship of the protocol parameter space to the IANA function, or perhaps not immediately because of how the IP addressing community will have its relationship with the IANA function and solidify that, or specifically the naming community, a CCTLD or a GTLD. But more importantly, how does this transition occur in a way that ensures the continued stability of the Internet, the continued openness and interoperability of the Internet, and an Internet that is going to be long-term sustainable and open. In order to achieve, I think, some of the needs and desires of it being both a platform for communication and engaging and a platform for raising issues from all stakeholders in the broader context around Internet policy. And so if it's helpful, I'm happy to share a little bit where we are in the process overall for the broader audience, and then also the avenues of engagement. As the process for looking at the transition, and in order to ensure that the different voices do have a seat at the table and are participating, really looked at working with the community to have a process that allows everybody to participate and is open for the engagement, both with regards to the stewardship transition itself of the U.S. And having seats for different parties in the dialogues. Obviously, each of the operational communities have open and participatory abilities to engage there. But then more specifically also in areas that relate to the accountability of the organization in a post-transition environment. That is when the U.S. is no longer there and doesn't hold the perceived backstop. How does one ensure accountability mechanisms that are also contributing to the continued stable operation of everything, of the Internet, of ICANN's mission and mandate? And again, going to the crux of everything, how do we ensure continued security, stability in the long run that really facilitates then the open and interoperable Internet without any barriers to engagement? And so from that standpoint, as we look at what does the transition have as an impact on civil society and on the community, I think the impact is really the importance of ensuring a transition that is going to ensure this long-term open Internet and long-term sustainable approach on that. And so I know that there's participation from many, and I know that oftentimes it's extra work, but it's a very important voice to have heard to ensure that in the long run this is gotten right and that we all benefit from the transition. And it's a reiteration of the value and the success of the multi-stakeholder model and the ability for the multi-stakeholder model itself, with everybody at the table, to be able to come together, find consensus, and find long-term solutions to this important area. So that would be sort of my laser remark, but I'm more than happy to engage in questions or discussions if anybody would like to drill down on anything else.
I'd like to ask a question of the moderator. There's a lot of talk around accountability. Mm-hmm. The accountability of ICANN as an organization itself, to itself from a governance perspective, and the accountability of ICANN to the community. And where I see the nexus of why is it important for a nonprofit to be interested in this topic, it goes to accountability, to your statement about open and seamless Internet.
Right.
And if there's more that you'd like to discuss about accountability specifically.
Sure, no, that's actually a good area to drill down on. I think that there's two elements with regards to this transition. There is the operational element, ensuring that as this transition occurs and the operational communities that have a responsibility as part of ICANN's mission in retaining a seamless Internet, that part, the operational technical side, is successful. On the accountability more broadly, it really is ensuring that checks and balances mechanisms are in place to prevent capture, right? Prevent capture by any entity, by any factor, and looking at what are the existing mechanisms that we have in place. We have, in working with the community, the affirmation of commitment reviews. We have the bylaw review requirements that ensure that there's a continuous review of the organization and the participation, including civil society, to ensure that that's continuing to evolve. But we also have accountability mechanisms with regards to the board and their responsibility, and the board, of course, is selected by the community. And so in looking at all the mechanisms in place, is there anything else that needs to be put in place? And then from the civil society perspective, I think what's important is hearing the voices there of what do they see as an important factor in relation to accountability from the stakeholders that civil society brings to the table. And I think that's an important voice to hear as well as one moves that forward. And how does one find the ways to strengthen or address any gaps around the accountability space that meet the needs of government, civil society, business, the technical community? Because in the end, you can't have a accountability mechanism strengthened that only represents the view of one. That's not sustainable. That's not workable. You need an accountability mechanism that's been strengthened that reflects the views and the needs and perceptions and perspectives and issues that the different community members raised. And in that context, no differently than any other dialogue, the view and the role of the civil society is very important in that discussion. So I hope that helps answer that.
Are there any other questions specifically?
Well, maybe alluding to the transcript, maybe a question to more practical aspects. Is there a deadline for getting and collecting information coming from the civil society? Is there a deadline that we need to respect if NGOs or civil society wants to bring in their views, their opinions? Is there a deadline where this is going to be finally taken down and drafted on? Maybe it's good that we can send that information to our NGOs.
Sure, absolutely. We can certainly outline the timeline that the different parts of the process have identified and get that information pushed out further. The participation of everybody in the context of that there's many who are participating in this and who are following the different dialogues, but it is perhaps useful to get you a summary of how the ICG is working in pulling their proposal together. So as one is looking at pulling of that proposal together, one can contact the different representatives there and also engage in the public comment process of that. Same obviously with the naming community as they're finalizing their proposal. And then importantly, as Lori had mentioned, in the context of the accountability process, there's two different work streams. One is the immediate time frame of the changing historical relationship, but then also identifying other issues around accountability more broadly. But that's a good idea to get you that information to send out through the respective communities and really provide the input through the representatives who are there and serving on those roles. That's a very good idea. Thanks, Rudy.
Do we have any more questions specifically for Theresa? If not, I would like to get into one or two of the questions that were posted in the chat and maybe open the discussion up. We have about 18 more minutes, and I would like to take the opportunity because it's so rare that we get this kind of exchange. And we're very fortunate. For those who are not in the room, David Olive is here. He's the Senior Vice President for ICANN. He's responsible for engagement. And the fact that ICANN is devoting these resources to our engagement speaks a lot to the value that we can add to the dialogue and to the importance that they place on civil society within ICANN's multi-stakeholder system. And for those who are not familiar with that term multi-stakeholder, you're going to hear it a lot the more you become engaged in Internet governance discussions. Who are the stakeholders? From a very broad view, you could say we are all the stakeholders. We all use the Internet. For the most part, we're all connected. We all have an interest, whether it's personal and professional, on the smooth operation, reliability, and sustainability of the Internet as a public resource, number one. Number two, we're all in this room probably from different points of view. There are people in this room who do direct grassroots fundraising and depend on the Internet. There are people in this room who may be registry or registrars. A registry actually is responsible for what goes to the right of the dot. The .org, the .net, the .com, that's a registry. A registrar is someone like GoDaddy who may actually sell you a name. There are brand owners who are very, very concerned not only with their reputation as a brand, but making sure that if you're buying goods or services from them, that they're actually coming from the right brand. And a concern that I think crosses over from the commercial to the non-commercial sector and is very concerning is the issue of counterfeiting, particularly in the areas of baby formula, drugs. What do we do as a society to make sure that when we talk about the reliability of the internet, we're not just talking about resolution, we're talking about something greater. Making sure that where we go and what we see and what we do are the things that we intend to do. And that is where, again, I believe that the so-called for-profit interest versus the not-for-profit interest completely dovetail. One of the questions that we had online that came from Eduardo, I believe, was, well, how do nonprofits manage the increased costs and staffing issues that go along with a very expanded generic top-level domain system? When I first started managing a nonprofit portfolio, what did I have to worry about? I had to worry about owning .org, maybe owning .com because I didn't want anybody else to, quite frankly, maybe .net. Then we expanded out into country-level, top-level domains. Okay, do I have to worry about that? There's 160 or more jurisdictions in the world. Do I need to go out and buy all those domain names? Well, I may not, or I may, depending on the size of my operation, what I intend to do with those names, and whether or not my particular name has been open to fraud. And I managed the portfolio of a very well-known U.S. charity. We had an enormous amount of fraud in and outside of the United States. So my concerns were probably a little broader than maybe a very local cooperative that is only working within a very specific jurisdiction or region. Now all of a sudden we're going from maybe a handful to maybe a couple hundred to potentially thousands. And again, there's extensions opening up that may apply to me. Right now I'm managing a portfolio for an education organization. So I'm looking at .education, I'm looking at .institute, there's so many variabilities. But I have a really limited budget and it is shrinking every single day. So what am I going to do? I've got defensive issues, I've got message issues, I've got staffing issues, and my budget is getting smaller and smaller. I reach out to industry experts, I engage, and I'm going to kind of toss this over to Brian a little bit to talk about what are some of the smart ways to budget, to make sure that your staffing is where it needs to be in order to manage what is an exponentially growing issue for nonprofits.
Sure, Lori, I think those are all really excellent points. The fact of the matter is, I think definitely this is where commercial interest and NGO and non-commercial interests do definitely converge. Your brand and how people perceive your organization, and really the interest for consumer protection, are very broad, and they span both the commercial and the non-commercial spaces. And the truth is, the for-profit organizations themselves are really struggling, and these are big, oftentimes, large multinational corporations that they feel like they don't have the budget and resources to handle this changing landscape, and they're really struggling with coming up with a strategy that works. And every organization, whether it's a Coca-Cola or it's a small, cooperative somewhere in the world, everybody has a budget, and everyone has to figure out how to handle this in the best way possible for their organization and within the budget that works for them. I think the one thing that I would definitely encourage the not-for-profits to do is to think more broadly about the kinds of partnerships and resources they can develop. We mentioned earlier the award that we received from the National Charitable Association for the pro bono work we do. I mean, that's work that we're doing for nonprofit organizations for free. So these are organizations that have the opportunity to work with me and my team that are frankly very expensive, and they're able to work with us at no cost. And so look to create partnerships like that so that you can maybe expand out your resources and One of the things that we really try and do with our not-for-profit clients is really come in. I think training is really important in this space. I think, we're seeing today there are sort of almost like language barriers to even understand what's going on, and to really understand even what the issues are. And so one of the things is really set up training for you and your team to really understand the internet governance space, understand ICANN, understand that ICANN is part of an even larger internet governance ecosystem, and try and figure out for your organization, where engagement makes sense for you. In addition to leveraging and thinking about creating a strategic partnership with a law firm that will hopefully provide pro bono services for you, think about engaging in ICANN directly, working with people like Klaus and Lori and the MPOC. They're really your representatives. They're representing your community. Leverage those relationships, develop those partnerships, become involved to the extent possible. I know everyone can't get on a plane and fly around to all the different ICANN meetings, but the thing I will also say is that there's funding available for that too. There's funding sometimes through the not-for-profit organizational constituency itself. There's something called crop funding that's available that provides funds for people to participate and to actually attend ICANN meetings. So there's the ability to kind of engage and get involved. And there are more resources available than you probably realize. So I think it's valuable to do that.
I will tell you that one of my long-term dreams for Pathfinder, and we've discussed this, is to create a global clearinghouse for the kind of advice that Brian gives to his clients, that I give in-house to my organization, either at low or no cost. It's been talked about. I don't believe it's ever really been done at the scale that would be needed in terms of what we're looking for engagement, but it's on the table. And I'm throwing it out there because if we do a clearinghouse like this, we're going to need the entire community to engage. We're going to have to find funders, experts, a way to manage questions and cases. But I think it's doable. It's out there. And we need to really think about that. How do we coalesce as a community? How do we create needed resources from way up? I mean, the multi-stakeholder model, ICANN's entire operating principle is bottom up. But we're not the bottom. The bottom's the top. The bottom is the end user, which is everybody here. Joan?
Joan Kerr, for the record. One of the ways to offset your expenses and to develop your organization, in addition to being creative and imaginative, whatever that means, is there's a lot of funders who will also help organizations that are disadvantaged to help them with capacity building. If they can identify a need and or to participate in larger conferences and things like that. So that's something that they could, not just apply to attend a conference or become part of ICANN or whatever, but also that long-term strategy of developing their web presence and engage their community so they can apply for funds to various organizations. There's lots of capacity building funds available that many organizations never apply for. So that's one way of actually lowering your expenses as well.
Rudy? I'm sorry. Oh, Rudy, then Brian. Or Brian, then Rudy.
Well, I was just going to add one other thing for as far as resources and a starting point. As Lori mentioned earlier, I do a lot of speaking, a lot of writing, and we're pretty good at my law firm about attaching those to my bio. So if you go to cattenlaw.com and just search for Winterfeldt and you go to my bio page, you'll find links to a lot of the presentations I've given and a lot of articles I've written that will be a lot of good background information about sort of developing a brand strategy for yourself online, and those that apply to NGOs as much as to commercial interests. And so that's a good place to kind of get started and understand probably ICANN better, the new GTLD program, what implications it is for your brand, thinking about it from both a defensive and really a brand and engagement tool.
In the interest of full disclosure, Brian's been my brand counsel for many years, and we've formed very good relationships together.
That's a good start for the resource center.
Yes, Rudy.
Yeah, Rudy, for the transcript. Being the chair of NPOC, when I was asked to join NPOC, and I'm coming from the other side in ICANN, I'm one of the co-founders of the at-large community, which is a well-grown baby now. I would say it's even an adult organization. I learned a lot of how that was built up, and my dream was that I could create something quite similar for the not-for-profit organizational structures, the NGOs, and allow them to participate in ICANN if they don't have the ability to raise their voice by themselves, that at least we can do it for them. And we should be at least first the ears and then start talking about what they need. But coming back to the goals, and now speaking as a board member of GKPF, what we have been trying to establish is a platform where we can help NGOs in this difficult process of being part of, first, the internet ecosystem, and secondly, stay on, because that seems to be the most difficult part. Getting on, yeah, new business, everybody is interested in, but once you're in the business, stay in the business. That's one of the big issues for NGOs, as we know that in periods of economic crisis, they don't have any spare dollar for participation in the internet ecosystem, especially in the governance part of it. So the ambition that we have is to establish a platform where NGOs can count on the support of GKPF to guide them, follow them, learn them how to maintain a domain name, how to maintain a website, how to be part of this communication channel. And I know that we will certainly have a partner by PIR, who is the structure that is having the .org registry, but also having .ngo and .ong. They also have offered some services, but we are looking at GKPF as an NGO itself has the experience of how an NGO is suffering maintaining its domain name. So I think that's one of the first proposals that we are going to put on the table before the summertime, is a platform where NGOs can become a member of GKPF to be supported for that part of the work to be done. And they can, if they don't want to be engaged immediately in what in the work that has to happen in ICANN and become a member of NPOC, we will bring their voice to the NPOC structure in the internet governance discussions, because actually what we see is most of the NGOs are willing to do. They don't have the time, they don't have the energy, and even the knowledge of what it is absent. So education is also a platform. And as we all discover, we are using a lot of acronyms. Just for the sample case, I'm saying NPOC, others are saying NPOC. The outside world will always put a question mark. Is that the same? Is that different?
What is it?
We need to learn people that what it all means, and we have to ourselves use the right terms. We have to go down to the earth of the NGOs and understand first how they are talking about the internet, use their language so that they understand us, so that we can reach with ICANN. Because that's what I have seen also in the at-large community. One of the big issues was nobody understood the other one. And that's I think one of the big missions of GKPF, try to make us understandable.
That's a good segue. I have posted a slide here with the URLs for within ICANN alone. The top one is what is MPOC, what is MPOC? It's non-profit operational concerns. Those are the three magic words, non-profit operational concerns. We encourage all of the NGOs that have been online today, if you're not already a member of MPOC, you can join for free. There's no charge. But it's a way for you to be connected into a communication system where we can give you updates on the latest developments within the ICANN community. In order to be part of MPOC, you do need to actually jump 2 hurdles. There's an application online for the non-commercial stakeholders group. We are a subset of the non-commercial stakeholders group. And once you become an NCSG member, then you may become an MPOC member. A little confusing, but we're working on it. And lastly, to find out the latest and greatest on dozens, probably hundreds of issues that are facing the community today is the ICANN.org main website. It's a big website. There is a lot on it, all kinds of highly technical discussions down to very broad discussions, some of which we touched on today, such as free speech and privacy and issues that are of concern to anybody who's operating as a presence on the internet. I want to thank everybody today. Yes, I'm sorry. Did you have something to say? I'm going to recognize David Olive in the room. Thank you.
Thank you. David Olive here from the ICANN staff. I would like to thank everyone for taking the time to be on this webinar. The Internet, as you know, is a network of networks. The connection, interconnection of these networks provide us access to institutions, e-commerce, e-government, personal communications. And the growth and use of the Internet is quite obvious to all our concerns, both profit and nonprofit. So I want to just point out, when someone asks, how do we know what's going on, you should also, like the Internet, network and connect your networks together through Lori, through Klaus, through Rudy, through Brian and Theresa here, to be able to answer your questions, be a source of information, and feedback to us your concerns, because your leaders here help us understand more and more about your concerns, and the interaction will make us better and wiser and have the Internet again be a free and global resource for all. So I want to thank everyone for the time and thank your representatives and leaders here for participating and letting us share your time with us. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I'm going to just advise to please check your email. Please check MPOC Voice if you are a member of MPOC for the next Pathfinder event. We're planning more webinars, at least 4 more this year. And we're also planning face-to-face events literally throughout the globe. We'll be in Africa, Latin America, and more plans are underway to give you robust programming at no cost for nonprofit participants. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Lori.
Thank you to ICANN to provide us this platform so that we are able to speak to our members outside.
Thank you.
Thanks very much.
Thanks.